It's my privilege to introduce first my Vice Wing Commander, who happens to have the title of National Diversity Officer for the Civil Air Patrol, Lieutenant Colonel Elizabeth Sydow. She is a veteran, a retired Air Force officer, retired Air Force Reserve officer. We've posted her biography onto Moodle, and she is quite accomplished in her career, and we're very honored to have her. Joining her is the most senior chaplain in our National Diversity Program, Chaplain David Grossman from the Great Lakes region. Let's see, Colonel Sydow, would you turn on your camera, ma'am, just to make sure that I can put you in here, please? There we go. Thank you so much. And with that in mind, we are being recorded. And for everyone else, if you'll please mute your mics and turn off your cameras so that we save our bandwidth. We are just very honored to have you both. And I can't think of a better team to really help our chaplain corps really understand the concept of what is diversity in the Civil Air Patrol, and ask that hard question, what is religious freedom going forward? Colonel Sydow, thank you so much, ma'am.
And sir, if you could enable my screen sharing.
I will take care of that right now. So it is yours.
Angle right here.
There we go.
All right, thank you. Well, I am glad to be here, and I actually just rolled in the parking lot 10 minutes ago and grabbed my computer, having driven all day to get to Savannah. So I appreciate the few minutes of breathing room while Chaplain Miner went through his points. So Chaplain Grossman and I are both glad to be here today to talk about diversity. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the National Diversity Program, and then we'll switch over to Chaplain Grossman, who will specifically talk about some of the chaplain and religious aspects of diversity, and then we'll go on to talk about reasonable accommodations, which I understand has been a topic of interest. So I'll have some slides just so you have all the words in front of you, but we will not, I won't read the slides to you per se, but they're more of an opportunity to stimulate some conversation. So my understanding is we have the whole class tonight, so we'll go as long as you guys want to talk. I'll try to throw in, we'll need to put in some breaks. I'm not sure how often, probably about at the 1 hour mark, and then we'll see where the conversation naturally leads to another break. So anyways, Chaplain Miner said I am Lieutenant Colonel Liz Sydow, and happen to be the Virginia Wing Vice Commander, and Chaplain and I go back pretty far, really to when I was the Chief of Staff when we brought him on as our Wing Chaplain, and so I have myself in the program 42 years. I started as a cadet and went through the program, completed the program, turned senior member, and then got commissioned in the Air Force. Spent 27 years between active and reserve, and was able to retire from there. And so now I get to do full-time CAP and parenting and other family life. So it's pretty cool. General Smith asked me back would have been about this time 2 years ago, if I would take the National Diversity Initiative team's results from their paper and prioritize the recommendations, because there was over 100 recommendations. We couldn't do everything. So I had a small team he asked me to put together very quickly, and in about 6 weeks, we prioritized everything as far as impact and diversity. One of them being to formalize the program and create a National Diversity Office and Region and Wing Diversity Officer positions. And after I briefed it to the BOG, he asked if I wanted the job. So I appreciate, the offer. I'd think about it, but I appreciate the the opportunity to do this and to bring my own Air Force experience into the program and my cadet experience, my CAP senior experience. So it's a, it's an honor for me to be here. Of course, my experience, especially being a female in the Air Force, as an Air Force officer and as a senior leader, is my experience, and it gives me some insight. So, and it's, so we are pushing forward, implementing those recommendations, as well as some new ones, as the emphasis has changed. So, Chaplain Grossman, I don't know if you guys all introduced yourselves earlier, if you want to do an additional introduction to yourself before we get into the slides.
No, I'm good. Thank you much, though.
Okay, great. So, okay, so that's right, you're broadcasting. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So these are the three things I want to talk about in the next, the rest of the time period. Going over diversity and inclusion, there's hordes of definitions out there. We're going to talk about how we've defined it for Civil Air Patrol. And then from there, this Chaplain Grossman will go into the invocations and benedictions. Basically the chaplain's presence and how to deal with some of the tensions and conflicts there between how you are ordained or commissioned and then serving the entire community. And then we'll get into reasonable accommodations. So, and that I think will be an opportunity for some good discussion. So just for a little bit of background, these slides are all from a new course. It's not the entire course, but General Smith just approved it yesterday or the day before, where we will be providing a diversity and equal opportunity lesson through Access that meets the requirement of the annual requirement that's already on the books, but to help commanders not have to figure out how to do the lesson every year and allow options for those who can't fit it in their schedule, or someone misses the meeting, so they can still get the required briefing. So most of these slides come right out of there. So the commander's intent, General Smith publishes a letter every year and about non-discrimination. But really we're going beyond just not discriminating against people. We want to create an inclusive and welcoming environment. And, so these are his points, what he wants to make sure comes across. And that, we're not limiting people based on artificial requirements or artificial, or, factors that are not relevant to the requirement of the position or the activity. And that ultimately this is a commander program, making sure that that this is being complied with. Next slide, please. The diversity and inclusion is more than just a regulation. It is truly core to what we're doing. In point that last year, when we wrote the 2020 strategic plan, diversity is part of a goal. The goal number 4 is a key element to that. And so the strategic plan is not going to change from year to year as on the main level. Each of the goals, those are fixed. Some of those sub areas though will update. So as we complete some of the tasks that are in the strategic plan, we'll move on to new tasks that support the same goal. And so we get into diversity and inclusion here. I'm going to the next slide. This is just a quote straight out of the regulation. As far as these are the legal requirements, that's probably the biggest, well, there's 2 main distinctions between non-discrimination and diversity and inclusion. Non-discrimination is implementing the legal requirements that we as, we get federal funding, we have to comply with these requirements. And so the list that's there starts with, about a third of the way down. you should all be familiar with: race, color, age, creed, etc. Oops, let me go back. And so non-discrimination is the legal requirement. It is also the formal complaint system. If the Equal Opportunity Program, if someone feels that they have been discriminated against, that is all handled by the Equal Opportunity Officer. That is not diversity. Diversity is going beyond the minimum requirements and striving for diversity in all areas. Everyone brings a diversity to the table. Even twins, they each have their own experiences going through life. People of the same religion still have different experiences. Women have different experiences than other women, and on and on. So every person brings a unique aspect. So diversity goes beyond these legal requirements to say, we want to be diverse in all areas. Everybody is welcome as long as they, are able to meet the standards and qualifications. And then inclusion goes on from there to people actually feeling that they're welcome, not just that it's written that they're welcome. So next slide, please. I've already talked about some of this. The public law, actually, I think, okay. So one of the other areas that you guys are all very familiar with is CAP's core values. And what we do with the non-discrimination, with diversity and inclusion, ties in very tightly with the core values. I believe that everything we do should always tie back to the core values. And whether it's, recognizing someone for what they did, and that's excellence in volunteer service, or counseling a cadet because they were disrespectful, and, showing them, wait a minute, you're not adhering to the core value of respect. Those core values should be are central to what we do. So, and the key one there is respect when it comes to diversity and inclusion. When we respect somebody, when we include someone, when we recognize the value that they bring to the organization and the value of diversity, we are respecting their experiences, their feelings, their wishes, and tying very strongly to that core value. So next slide, please. So I already kind of covered this in the earlier parts. It's really, all three are essential. We talk about, it's about recruiting, attracting the best and the brightest, not overlooking someone because they're different. They may, bring something unique to the table. But it's also, it's the right thing to do. There's, every human has value. And I think it's, as the Chaplain Corps, you guys intrinsically recognize that. So, so it's the right thing to do to bring people in, and, not eliminate, not leave them out just because they're different in some way, but also to help them to thrive. And inclusiveness is, helping them see themselves in the organization, that they can succeed and that they have something to contribute. And what we offer to, to the community goes beyond the search and rescue mission and aerospace education. It's building citizens, and even as senior members, creating a, helping people to grow to their fullest potential. So, this all ties together in this integrated approach. Next slide, please. Okay, now formal definition. The second bullet there, it's composite of individual characteristics, experiences, and abilities. It's consistent with our mission and core values. What does that mean? Those characteristics are they don't detract from the mission. They're not something that would keep them from helping accomplish the mission. They're not something that violates our core values, but that is aligned with that, and reflective of the communities in which we serve. We're talking about, that comes down to really is that, even though we are one CAP, there are 52 wings. Each wing has a unique population from the others. Although we tend to be percentage-wise about the same split, across the country for gender. The percentages, race can vary significantly from one state to another. And so we're not building a program that just says every wing has to have X percentage of this minority. It's what does your population look like? So we've updated our diversity data when someone joins to use the same data as the Census Bureau, so that we can actually see what what the community looks like, and wings can measure themselves to say, are we, is this good? It's a good indicator to say whether or not they're recruiting and retaining members, if it's close to what the local population looks like. So the list below, you'll see the same items that were in the non-discrimination statement, but a lot more. So personal life experiences, to be honest, that covers a significant portion of the rest. We're talking geographic, socioeconomic, financial, work, jobs. We don't just want professional engineers or pilots. We want people from all sorts of backgrounds, degreed and not degreed. So, we're really, and this probably doesn't capture everything, but it was a good starting point. So,
and how is this different from affirmative action?
Affirmative action is basically saying we're going to have a certain percentage, it's a quota system that we will bring in so many people. What we're looking for more is that we build a program where we are attracting the right people, the diverse people, right being diverse, a broad range of people, not just one, a small, narrow portion of the population. So we're not going to go out and say you have to recruit X number of, Hispanics or African Americans, but it should get you to think, where are we recruiting? If we're recruiting, if our population is all homogeneous and we keep recruiting in the same places, we're going to keep getting the same background, the same population. So rethinking where do we go and recruit that's still appropriate. So Florida wing, so in Florida wing, they actually looked and said, well, we want to recruit more women. So where do the, teenage girls go? And they wanted to recruit more Hispanics. So they looked at some of the cultural festivals that were happening, and, and events for that were being held for girls. And instead of just recruiting at air shows, they started recruiting in, they looked at recruiting in some non-traditional areas, because there's, just because it's not an air show doesn't mean you don't have people who are interested in aviation or leadership. So it's an opportunity there to go beyond what we've been doing. And
whose responsibility is the recruiting?
Recruiting still belongs to the recruiting function, but it should be a joint effort. The diversity officers should be involved with looking at how we're recruiting and advising and getting into the, where we're going, helping to come up with maybe some other areas, some schools they haven't recruited at before, or events, or community groups that might have a different population than what our squadrons have. So it is a joint effort. Obviously, like with everything else, ultimately it's the commanders working to make that happen. Girls in Aviation is a great opportunity. And a lot of squadrons get involved with their local, Girls in Aviation Day. I've seen Young Eagles programs where they open a day up, specifically for Girls in Aviation, to support Girls in Aviation Day. It's a, so it's a win-win situation. There's Girls in Aviation is supported in their mission, and we are supported in, expanding the diversity of our organization and reaching more people. So,
and General Smith had talked about making building relationships with other organizations. You'd mentioned a few.
Right. So we, right now, National is working on an MOU with Women in Aviation, and that's in draft format. And I'm doing the legwork right now for Tuskegee Airmen to see if there's an opportunity there for us to work together with an MOU. Chaplain, if you want, I know I see a bunch of questions popping up.
We're going to come back to them, but I'll bring in some questions as we go along the way.
Okay.
But we're definitely going to come back to them.
Inclusion, I think I've already talked about it. You know, and then just kind of, this is just a statement as far as the value of diversity. And more studies are actually showing a significant increase in creativity and problem solving and productivity in organizations that are more diverse. So bringing you know, new and fresh ideas. So yeah, so this is just a slide, just giving some examples of CAP's diversity. And CAP has been you know, diverse from the beginning. The last CAP Volunteer Magazine was a great article from the Louisa Morris Center. And that talked about, you know, CAP was the first organization, uniformed organization to have a gender and racially integrated flying unit long before the military had it. So, you know, see, and that's been from day one. It's been an opportunity. You know, it's been open to more. Its willingness to serve and patriotism, and not, you know, at least not officially the other factors. So, not saying it's been perfect, but it's been a definitely an inclusive organization from the beginning. So
I always remember that one of our earlier pilots was Meinhard Rabi, who was the Munchkin coroner in the Wizard of Oz. And so, you know, he couldn't get into the Air Force, but he was definitely a pilot, and Civil Air Patrol was all open arms.
Yep. So, okay, so this is, the next part is Chaplain Grossman. Do you want to go into any of those questions now or come back to them later?
So one of the questions we were talking about was also the forms. Our forms tend to be gender specific to, you know, binary, as opposed to open. Are the forms changing? How are those things starting to get evolved?
So at the moment, CAP is still recognizing, you know, it's male and female as a gender. There are, the uniform regulation changed recently when the new one came out to formalize the process for somebody who is going through transition and, you know, has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, so that they can transition and wear the uniform of the gender that they identify with. You know, the guide, there's a guide that we have out, 1-10, as far as accommodating special needs.
And that form 1-10 will be available on Moodle.
Okay, and it's on the national website, so accessible. And, you know, that talks about overnight events, especially encampments, and being able to accommodate for members who are in, you know, who are in transgender, so that they can accommodate it. In part because every state has different laws when it comes to gender. We, you know, have to look at that and acknowledge, you know, we basically go with whatever the local laws are for someone to be able to, you know, when they can change their gender marker in e-services. So, and although that's not addressed in the regulations right now, that is something that National will do, you know, based on what the state law allows, and, you know, for switching. And So one of the things we are doing, which I'm just right now putting together the plan on how we're going to do it, is doing a review of all the regulations from a diversity perspective to see where we need to make some changes.
Yeah, so 10-1 kind of goes over the basics of it, and that'll be on the noodle format. And we're going to cover some of these things in a third part of our discussion tonight. We're going to come back to some of these pieces of it.
Yeah.
So going on to the invocations piece, are you showing up the new screen
Yes.
now? Okay.
Yes.
So looking forward to sharing the idea. This was a request from National Commander and the Chief of Chaplains here to bring up this topic and how we can manage it. So I'm hoping we can have a good discussion with it. I do want to hijack the chat box. Apologize to everyone in charge here, but I'd like to hijack the chat box. And so I'm going to ask people to please add some thoughts into the chat box as we go through. I'm going to ask some specific questions and ask folks to participate in that one. So first question is, as chaplains, what is our responsibility to the First Amendment right that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion? So if you would type in the chat box how you interpret that idea. What is our responsibility as chaplains to protect that First Amendment right? Free exercise, be sure that everyone worships freely, allowing various religious backgrounds, accommodations, absolutely. Good expressions, good expressions. Prayer is allowed without coercion. Good, excellent, some excellent ideas here. So then my next question would be, when it comes to prayers and invocations and benedictions, one of the things we want to be aware of is that we in the Chaplain Corps, our mere presence there is representing the divine. When we show up, and we show up as chaplains, some of us more obvious than others, but when we show up as chaplains, we are representing the divine. Whether we say anything or not, our presence is there. And that's critical because our presence there and the ministry of presence brings God into the picture. You know, the moral standards of the country really require a presence to be there. And so we want to make sure that we attend and are shown and visible there, and invisible that we are representing the chaplaincy, even without saying a word. So I'd ask the question regarding invocations, but I mean invocations and benedictions. If you would, in the chat, please, what is the purpose of an invocation? What is the purpose of an invocation? Bringing around blessings, inviting everyone to worship together, summoning the divine, bringing down the spirit, call to worship, all excellent answers, all excellent answers. So we're going to sanctify the setting. We're going to inspire the occasion. We're going to establish the foundation of what has to be accomplished in this meeting, the spiritual part of what's going on. So then the question would become, who is the invocation for? Who is the invocation for? Everyone, those in attendance, the folks that were there on behalf of everyone there. Absolutely, absolutely. That's who the invocation is for. It's not about the chaplain. It's not even about the commander. It's about the participants. And we do our invocations at the behest of the commander. And so we also have to consider, when making an invocation, what is the commander's intent for the occasion? In other words, when we start to write our invocations, and of course we are preparing ahead of time, we're making sure that we're prepared ahead. I recently had a situation where I was asked to speak at an invocation, and because the other chaplain, the wing chaplain wasn't there, and all of a sudden I was called up and I had to wing it there. And I asked Chief Dandridge afterwards, I asked him, you know, how could I have done better? And he mentioned all the good things I'd done, and he mentioned the areas I could have improved in, but it was great to have someone to kind of review on. But what is the commander's intent for the occasion? If we know what the commander's intent for the occasion is, then our invocation should focus in that as well, you know, pushing towards that. So speaking of commander's intent, we have a recording here I want to share with you from Brigadier General Phelka on commander's intent. I want to, let's see, here we go.
Greetings. I'm Brigadier General Phelka, the National Vice Commander for Sydow. I've been asked to speak to you today about the command intent behind an invocation at a Civil Air Patrol event. An invocation can serve to stir emotion in the audience. It serves to unite the audience behind the purpose for a gathering, and it helps to set the tone for the commander. I'm sure you've seen many gatherings where Civil Air Patrol members are buzzing in conversation prior to the beginning of an event. The room is called to order. Vice Commander for Civil Air Patrol. I've been asked to speak to you today about the command intent behind an invocation at a Civil Air Patrol event. An invocation can serve to stir emotion in the audience. It serves to unite the audience behind the purpose for a gathering, and it helps to set the tone for the commander. I'm sure you've seen many gatherings where Civil Air Patrol members are buzzing in conversation prior to the beginning of an event. The room is called to order, and the chaplain is usually one of the first people invited to speak. What does that speech do? It brings us together. It unites us as CAP members. And in doing so, I think it's important that the chaplain think about what it is that unites us. Something that everyone in the room has in common might be CAP's core values. An invocation might speak to the core value of volunteer spirit, for example, or volunteer service. It's also important to remember that while the majority of the participants in the room come from divergent faith backgrounds and appreciate an invocation, others may not follow any particular faith. So we also need to respect this perspective. So the time should be used to unite the room without alienating anyone. The best invocations, in my opinion, are very well prepared, not excessively lengthy, and serve to unite the membership through reflection, a profession of gratitude, and positive emotional expression. I hope that helps.
Let me see if I can. Here we go. So what we're looking at then becomes perspectives, and there was a good question that came up in the chat box. So the chaplains must be able to minister and speak to all faiths in this pluralistic environment, and you have to know your audience as we're there for them. But the question that becomes, what about, so there's two perspectives. You can say you pray without any specific names or faith, but rather something which everyone can be on board with. Or you could say, I will pray in my tradition. Please join me in your own tradition. So my question to you, and using the chat box here, was given the two opportunities, you know, that you're either speaking in a pluralistic term with no specific mention of faith, or you're speaking in your own tradition and inviting others to speak in their tradition. What are the strengths or weaknesses of each approach? When is it appropriate to use one approach or the other? So speak pluralistically versus speaking in your own faith and inviting others to join in their faith. What's the strength or weakness of each approach? And when is appropriate to use either one of those approaches? And this conversation can continue in Moodle. So one of the comments about speaking your own faith when there is more or less common ground, I think that's an important consideration here as well, is that if you know that everyone in the crowd is of one faith, there's no reason not to speak in the faith of that one if you know that everyone there is. The question becomes, if it's a multitude, a pluralistic group, then how do you, speak to respond to respect to them as well? Excellent insights here. Drawing from your own tradition as long as it's still pluralistic. Absolutely. The chaplain's role here really is, we do not have command authority. We're there representing, the divine, but we are there to support the commander, to review the commander's intents and support that idea. So the moral, the social, the ethical, the spiritual needs of the commander, that's what we're there to help support. But again, it is the commander and the commander and the people in the squadron or wing that we're, there to support them. So we also have to ask the question of whether the attendance at the event is a required attendance for graduations or command ceremony or conferences, or is it a voluntary? Certainly if it's, if it's billed as a religious event, meaning there's there may be a chapel service at the beginning of or there might be, services of one kind or another that's billed as a religious service, and the person going in knows full well that this is a Catholic service or a Protestant service or a Jewish service, Muslim service. If they know that's what it is, that's what they're expecting. They don't have to come. If they choose to come, then absolutely speak in the tradition of that faith. But if it's something like graduations or command ceremony or conferences, then we have to ask that question. If it's a voluntary, is it required? If it's required, we have to make sure that we're speaking to the pluralistic crowd. This is an interesting story that prompted me to ask some questions. And so it was fascinating to me, this story that Colonel Williams is about to share with us. It was something that I learned about in spring encampment. And it was a very strong, it was a very challenging situation, and he spoke to this very amazingly. So this picture is about 10 to 15 years old, but the video is from Colonel Bob Williams as he speaks about this concept of command intent and a tough situation.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Bob Williams. I'm from the Illinois Wing and have been involved in the encampment program since 2002, serving as a commander 11 times. Encampments include a capstone experience via graduation ceremonies, which are attended by family and friends, as well as members of the general public and dignitaries, both internal and external to CAP. Often these graduations are the first exposure an attendee has to the Civil Air Patrol. In our case, there are usually 300 to 400 guests in attendance, in addition to the 150 or so encampment participants. In most cases, the opening of the graduation is an invocation presented by a chaplain, usually from CAP, who has also served on staff for the activity itself. A number of years ago, I found myself in the unenviable position of having to relieve a member of my staff due to his unwillingness to provide a non-sectarian invocation, despite my directives to that effect. I was finishing up getting dressed behind a partition in my quarters when two of my staff, the chaplain and the commandant of cadets, entered my office and continued what was clearly a heated discussion regarding the upcoming invocation. The commandant had become aware of the fact that the chaplain intended to convey a prayer in Jesus' name, as was the custom of his faith. The commandant, being Jewish, was making the point that in addition to feeling alienated himself, there would be any number of other faiths and ethnicities represented, not only among the cadets and adult staff, but by the families, friends, and general public in attendance, and that invoking any specific faith customs would not be in the spirit of welcoming and inclusion intended for these types of events. They continued for some time with no progress towards compromise, until I finally stepped out and intervened. The chaplain was very firm in his insistence that his faith allowed no other option, to which I responded that while I sympathized with the issue, his role during the activity was not to proselytize, but to act as a resource and counsel for all that attended, regardless of faith, and that his responsibility to me as a commander, to the Civil Air Patrol, and most importantly to the members in our charge, was to provide an inclusive and welcoming environment in which no one would feel less or as an outsider. With his unwillingness to fulfill his duties made clear, I had no recourse but to relieve him on the spot, a decision that I did not make lightly, and one that I revisit often to ensure that I took the right course of action. This last-minute change forced us to proceed without an invocation. As a commander, it is my responsibility to fulfill the letter and spirit of the programs as CAP defines them. Chaplains can play a key role in these tasks and activities, but it is important that they provide their services and skills in a pluralistic manner that aligns with the respective commander's intentions. Thank you for your time.
Okay. And so now if you would, type in the chat box. The past 15 minutes we've been talking about specifically invocations and benedictions. What are you walking away with? What are you coming away with from the conversation? We'll do some questions coming up, but what is it you're walking away with here? So it is important, as I'm seeing some of the notes that are being posted, it is important to recognize that there are faiths that that their endorser agrees that they must, pray in their faith. For example, there are some faiths that you must pray in the name of Jesus, and that is, what that faith requires, and the endorser is backing that. Then that might be a situation where you would not be doing a pluralistic invocation, but might reserve your opportunities to speak at a time when it is specifically an event like a religious service, for example, and that way to participate in that way and be a chaplain in that way. But it absolutely have to follow with our endorsers, but at the same time we also have to make sure that we're following the command intent, or lose the opportunity to speak, or step out at that time. Absolutely. So very good insights here, and I really appreciate everyone joining in the chat conversation. We will have time to have more. We have more conversation as we go on this evening, but I want to get back to Colonel Sydow to continue our general presentation as well. So back to Colonel Sydow. And the topic here will be reasonable accommodations.
Okay. So go ahead and go to the next slide. We already touched on this. Reasonable accommodations are really just basically modifications to help a member to have equal access to the rights and privileges of membership. It specifically, by definition, is talking about disability in law, but we also make accommodations for other things such as faith, dietary requirements, and gender identity. There's some key pieces, the tenets that we have to consider when we're talking about reasonable accommodations. First of all, they've got to be reasonable, which means you got to look at the circumstances of the activity. That could include the length of time. It could include the facility itself that's being used. It can't cause undue hardship for the organization. So, it can't cost the organization a significant amount of money or require an effort significantly beyond what the volunteers are able to provide. The other key piece is that it must still provide for the essential functions for the requirement or program. So, which means you have to really identify what is essential for that activity. Not necessarily what is traditional, what we've always done, but what is essential for getting, for what the activity or program is trying to accomplish. It includes adequate time to make adaptations. So for example, if somebody walked in and said, I need an accommodation for for X at the beginning of an event, if you can, then, that would be a great opportunity to help them feel included. But sometimes you can't do that, such as, dietary. If you've planned your menu and somebody comes in with a unique dietary requirement that wasn't planned for in the menu, and the event's starting, it's something that you can't necessarily go out and just buy on the spot, especially if it's special dietary foods. But, maybe there's a accommodation you can say that it's, you could still attend, but we'll have to, make arrangements. You'll have to purchase your own food. We'll reduce your costs to offset that, what we're not spending on food. And, you can still attend, and, if the facilities would, be able to accommodate that, and that they can, and obtain the food locally. So the pamphlet 1-10 talks about a 30-day advance notice by the member requesting the accommodation, basically giving time to look at options, because there is no one answer that's going to work for every situation. You've got to look. There's so many factors involved in a lot of cases that you really have to have time to look at what the request is, what the members' needs are, what the facility, the volunteers, the activity can allow. And so, it needs to be a timely request. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So we talked about, knowing what's essential to the program, and tie back to the non-discrimination program. And a great example from 1-10 is, if you have a blind member who wants to participate in emergency services, if they wanted to fly as a mission scanner, and an essential function of the mission scanner is to be able to look out the window and observe things on the ground. So that is something that you can't accommodate for, at least with current technology. But someone who is blind could operate a radio and do what is essential for that radio operations. Now, there may be a few things that they can't do directly. So a lot of, our radios are digital readouts. And so you're turning a dial, and if you can't see, you can't tell what channel it might be on. But they could certainly instruct someone else on how to change the channel to get to the channel they want. And they could take notes, they can broadcast on the radio, so they could still do the essential functions of talking on the radio and keeping a log and what it takes to be a mission radio operator. So, that's things that, just an example of being inclusive and looking at what the essential functions are for the activity. So, next slide. Okay, start off, this is one that we run into, traveling on Saturdays. Encampment starts on a Saturday, and arriving late. And, there are, certainly things happening on Saturday that are important to the encampment activity, but the graduation requirements is to participate in 80% of the program, of the essential requirements of the encampment. So looking at the schedule for that activity and the way the schedule is laid out, can you accommodate for somebody arriving, later Saturday evening or early Sunday morning? Certainly overnight sleeping time is not part of the program as far as the training elements. So, taking that into account. Now, going a step further, if you know that you're going to have members arrive who can't arrive on Saturday, can you shift some of the essential requirements, some of the mandatory parts of the program into Sunday, so that they're not missing as many essential requirements and they have a better chance of making the 80% of the event. So, you know, there's things that with advance notice, or if you know that that you have a good chance of needing that accommodation, planning for it ahead of times. Something we do for our encampments is we already know pretty much that we're going to have people who are gluten intolerant, who can't eat pork, or vegetarians. And so the encampment now, they just plan that right in their menus so that people, you know, there's no last minute requests unless it's, you know, through the unique things that may not be something that we plan for, but at least those common ones are already planned in the menu so that there's not a big adjustment 30 days prior to make accommodations for, say, gluten-free, that there's an option already planned into the menu. So
one of the things we talked about regarding the spring encampment in Illinois, which because it's on a Navy base, it's spread out over 2 weekends. And so to get the 80% in for everybody, it means packing in everything from a whole week-long encampment into 2 weekend sessions. And one of the things we were able to figure out for someone who was Catholic who needed to attend Mass, and yet the program didn't allow for it because it was so packed, but we were able to find a Mass that was available Sunday evening, not far from where encampment is, so that after encampment graduation, the family could still get to a local Mass. You know, so again, it's kind of being aware of what the challenges are, what the needs are, but we have to have that communication in advance. I think that's one of the responsibilities of the Chaplain Corps, is to kind of be looking in and seeing, based on this event, you know, what do I know might become challenges? You know, if I so that someone who's Jewish and Sabbath observance can't come on Saturday, or again, you know, a Mass on a Sunday afternoon if it can't be provided at encampment, ideas that we need to be looking ahead for religious accommodations and not last minute things. The last thing a commander of encampment wants is something to come up 24 hours before the encampment. That is not the time to do it. And what I've been advising cadets in Great Lakes region coming with requests would be, you know, appropriate is 30 days ahead. 30 days ahead of an event is when you need to make sure that they know any accommodations that you might be requesting or supporting.
mm-hmm.
I was thrilled with NISA because NISA, you know, I finished my 80% before I came in on Sunday morning, finished my 80% Friday, you know, before Friday afternoon, and I was able to leave and be in a Jewish environment for Sabbath and not trapped there over a Sabbath.
Okay. Another accommodation example is, and this is just for the cadet program in general, a cadet with a learning disability that may need more time to take a test. The tests are online, they're timed, there's no override function for the timing, but there is an option to print the test and allow the cadet to take a paper version, and then the proctor manages the time. And they, you know, so the commander can waive the time requirement and allow them additional time to take the test. They can also reduce the number of answers, like for someone who may have a learning disability. Instead of 4 possible answers, they delete one of the, you know, wrong answers and let them pick out of 3 possible answers. So they're still demonstrating the essential requirement of showing that they know what, you know, the material is, but it's accommodating for that learning disability.
So it really comes back to being totally aware of what the real mission is and the essential mission. What do we need to actually accomplish that part of it?
Right, and that will vary from event to event or qualification to qualification. You know, and even encampments run different lengths. They have, you know, even the same event from year to year, the schedule gets changed up depending on what days you can get which facilities at your location or your speakers. So the information,
But different for each one. Everyone needs to be addressed each time.
So and that really then comes down to that there is no one answer for any given situation. It's going to change. Different locations, different time of year, different resources, different volunteers, what you can and can't do. And it's really one of the conversations Chaplain Grossman and I had the other day is that, it's a give and take on both sides. So, the member is making adjustments to be able to be there. And the organization is being asked to make adjustments. And it's not all one-sided. But the goal being is to have that conversation. If you have that conversation, what is the member asking for? What do they need? And then, how do you accommodate for that? Or, what's possible within your program? And being willing to think outside the box a little bit. Again, what is essential to that activity? So.
There was an interesting discussion on a chat. There's a chat box discussion about dietary restrictions and peanut allergies and things like that. The first thing that comes to my mind is that, when we're using a military base, the military base may be serving meals and they have their restrictions to what they can do. And so I had a situation with someone who wanted to come to the Navy base with a vegan diet, and there wasn't quite enough there available for someone who's eating vegan. But we do have a summer encampment. If you can't get to the spring encampment, which is on a Navy base, you could go to a summer encampment, which is, more Cap run. And I know that when my son Levi went to Johnson Flight Academy, the Civil Air Patrol volunteer in the kitchen was really accommodating and really went out of her way to meet his dietary needs. And it moved him. It really moved him. He even got a gift for her as he left because he was really moved that she'd gone so far out of her way to make sure that he wouldn't just have the bare minimum required for his diet, but she actually did everything she could to really make sure he was eating properly. So again, it depends. MREs are a possibility. There are vegetarian MREs. There are kosher MREs. But none of them taste good. But anyway.
Well, and I don't know, you'd want to go a whole week living off an MRE as a former deployable military member. Yeah, those are not going to be good by the end of the year. You're not going to be in good shape. Someone asked about peanuts. The simple answer is there's so many peanut allergies out there now. Just don't serve them. I don't know there's no requirement. There's nowhere on the menu to, that requires you serve something with peanuts. We had we had one encampment where they catered the banquet, and the caterer provided carrot cake as one of the dessert options, and it had nuts in it, and they put a nut on top of it. And a cadet, seeing the nut on top of it, still took the carrot cake and ate it and ended up in the emergency room. So after that, we just tell the caterers, no nuts. And when we plan the menus, no nuts. It just makes it's just one less thing to worry about. I saw halal pop up a couple times, as a question, and absolutely you need to, that's something that's a dietary requirement for that person. That's where starting the conversation early. Even better if you can ask the question on the encampment application or the event application. If there's any special dietary requirements, then you can design it right into your menu. A lot of hotels now, I plan conferences or oversee the planning of conferences. If you identify it early enough, the hotel will, they have caterers that can provide kosher meals or halal meals. Sometimes it's just delivered, ready to heat. But it's custom made, it's specifically done in a kosher kitchen or, to the requirements of a halal diet. So then the discussion is, that additional expense. Is it something the encampment can absorb? Does that have to be passed along to the member, the price difference between what they're paying for regular meals versus the special meal? Because you think about it, encampments and these activities, the cadets need to participate in this stuff, especially encampments. If they're going to progress in the program, it's something that we need to be able to make sure that they can participate in. So
Absolutely.
And I think this is one, especially, chaplains, we talk about, the pretty obvious one is being able to accommodate the religious faith and requirements of their faith. If it's a holy day for them, if they're required to have prayers time every night, the personal time that's built into encampments is designed in part to allow for personal prayer time. So you're looking at that, but a lot of dietary requirements, there are dietary requirements that are driven by religious requirements also. So that is something else that the chaplains, would have a direct influence on. But you also can, just help. Chaplains tend to be, pretty good at keep getting conversations going and helping people to work through and find solutions. So I think there's opportunities there where a chaplain may be able to help with that conversation, even if it's not directly a religious accommodation.
My son is in the my middle son is in the United States Marine Corps. During boot camp, kosher was not going to be a viable option. So essentially he did more vegetarian and avoided, he did a style of kosher, but not what his family was used to. But once he got out of boot camp, it was his chief master sergeant, God bless them, who happened to be from Brooklyn and said, "Hey, you're Jewish. You need to get kosher." And so he got a waiver. The chaplain was able to say, this is what the needs are, and this is an official thing. And he was able to get a waiver that, and he would be responsible for his own meals. So instead of having his, the commons, taken out of his pay, he was able to, get it more pay, but he had to make sure that he took care of his own takes care of his own food responsibilities. But boot camp is going to be challenging, and an academy like the Air Force Academy, it can be challenging. And so if you have someone who wants to, go to something like an academy, then they need to be doing that well in advance to find out what kind of accommodations could be made before they ever walk in the door. Again, it's that communication up in front. And there are sometimes you want to, again, the accommodations can go both ways. My son desperately wanted to be in the Marine Corps, so he made his decision, right? That's it's too bad that he has to go against tenets of faith to be able to do so, but he was prioritizing, and that's what we all have to do. It's when I attend a live event at a hotel on Sabbath, I'm foregoing the opportunity for religious services on Sabbath at a synagogue, but if it's important enough to me to participate, then I definitely want to do so. There are some questions regarding the transgender and showers and bathrooms. That's all covered in Cap 1-10 with some of the needs requirements. And although it's something we want to be sensitive to in the Chaplain Corps, I want to make sure we're focusing tonight on specific issues that the Chaplain Corps needs to be responsible for. So I'd like to turn the conversation now to the uniforms.
Okay, so the recent update when Cap Reg 39.1 was published, the uniform regulation, it formalized the policy on uniform waivers. Now realize that these waivers have been in place for several years, even though the regulation, for most people it clearly stated, or the old manual clearly stated that the Air Force style uniform could not have certain of the accommodations. But the Air Force, and since it's the Air Force uniform, they've been allowing those waivers for several years. One of the frictions we ran into was that because the manual did not allow for it, there were folks who thought it wasn't possible. So the new regulation gets more into that and specifically addresses the uniform waivers. And we do have members who get the waiver for, especially for grooming requirements, for headgear such as a hijab or a turban, to wear it with the Air Force style uniform. And it's basically the Air Force is, they're authorizing it for their own members, and they're authorizing it for CAP. So the process is there. One of the things we've been watching is how long it takes to get that waiver through. And for a routine waiver for things like a hijab or turban or a beard waiver, we had one that went through in about 48 hours from once the chaplain finished their recommendation to when the Air Force approved it. It happened very, very quickly. Now the ones that aren't routine, that it's a first time request or it hasn't happened in recent years, those could take longer. But one of the pushes that I made last year was helping to educate that, these waivers are available even when the regulation didn't reflect it. And now that the regulation says it, we have not been getting, any feedback that it's not happening, that they're getting hung up anywhere. So,
Although I think 48 hours is not really a...
Not really, yeah, it can happen. Now, realizing that Virginia Wing has processed several, of these, and the squadron it came out of has the majority of the religious waivers, uniform waivers for the wing. So the squadron's very familiar with it, the process. And so they already have a template. They've been through it before. The wing chaplain understands what the requirements are, can do the interview and get the report written and recommendation very quickly. And then, it went right on through really fast.
So when we have a request for a waiver from the written regulations, how does that waiver go up the chain of command? Who's responsible for what as it goes up the chain of command?
So it starts with the member. They submit it to their commander. It goes through the commanders. There is no requirement for it to go through the personnel officers. The commanders are not approving or disapproving. They don't have that authority. When it heads up to wing, it goes to the wing chaplain. And the chaplain should interview the member. If the member is a cadet, then the chaplain would include the parents in that interview. And actually, I would defer to Chaplain Minor. Chaplain Minor, if you want to jump on, because I know you've done these for Virginia Wing. You've done every interview for every waiver we've gotten. As far as what the interview is looking at.
And really what that is just making sure that this is a sincerely held belief, that this really isn't a whim, that this is something that the family has practiced, and there is a history within the family, either a generational history or there is a strongly held conviction that the cadet or the senior member really truly does adhere to this particular faith tradition and believes that they are compelled to request this specific accommodation. And that's really why we don't have automatic processes here, because each case is individual. Each case has been pushed to the lowest level of command. In our case, it's our Capt USAF commander to do the accommodation. But ma'am, it's pretty much just making sure that the member truly does believe what they say they believe, and this isn't a whim. Thank you.
So he's not getting a waiver to wear a beard in blues just because he's part of a motorcycle group.
So,
Chaplain Sydow, Colonel Sydow, Chaplain Brig.
yes.
Could we also ask everyone, please, don't send these waiver requests direct to me. They need to go up through the chain of command. All you're going to do is hinder the ability of getting these things through in a timely manner. And so please be aware. I will ultimately see it, but it needs to go up through the chain of command, please.
Right. So the mandatory touch is the wing chaplain, and they write a recommendation. And then after that, before and after that, it's through the command chain. So it's,
and the chaplain's responsibility here is just to confirm that that is the person's faith, and that's part of the faith of the family. It's not the chaplain's job to approve the waiver. He doesn't have the authority, but rather it has to go to Capt USAF, right?
yes. So the only ones who can deny it is the national commander or Capt USAF, the national commander for corporate or approve it. It's approval, denial. Everyone else is adding a recommendation if they wish. But you know, the ones I've seen that go through typically, you know, it's just recommend approval, or you know, they're going to recommend disapproval. There, you know, would be a need for justification. So, but you know, I've never seen one where if the chaplain recommended it for religious, you know, based on a religious request, that that it's not gone through, you know, to national. That doesn't mean the Air Force is going to approve every request either. Ultimately, the Air Force style uniform, it's their decision on what they approve. And, you know, so staying as close as possible to the original design of the uniform. For turbans and hijabs, you know, plain colors that match the uniform pants, or black that you know, doesn't draw attention to it. You know, no flashy colors, and just you know, is what will be approved. So, you know, providing an example or a photo of what it will look like helps with the process, especially if it's unusual, not, you know, not one of the more common ones, such as a hijab or a turban.
I want to be conscientious of our time. We're
Mhm.
well into the hour, and a bit past, and I'm thinking that there are some specific questions regarding the uniform, skirts and shorts and things that we wanted to cover as well. So I'm thinking, Chaplain Minor, did you want to officiate a 5-minute break here?
Sure, I think that'd be great, please. So let's see, it's currently 2019 Eastern Daylight Time. Why don't we come back at 2030? So 11 minutes, is that okay? Time to stretch, and we'll be back for some more stimulating conversations. Thank you so very much.
Good to see you, Liz. Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I made it, finish my trip in time. I should have been here an hour early, but.
Yeah, it's never fun to just show up and have to run in and start doing a presentation. But you're doing well.
Oh, thank you.
We appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you letting me interrupt and make my request. That
Yeah, well, and all that, unfortunately, all it does is slow it down.
Yeah, it does, because then I have to send it back.
I mean, especially when you're talking about cadets, you know, for them, getting into a uniform allows them to go to do an orientation flight, allows them to promote. You know, and since there's no delay on the Curry achievement, you know, cadet could technically join one night and promote if they met, you know, if they're able to meet the requirements in that one night. So I met a cadet who had been in 2 weeks, had gotten his first achievement already, gone on an orientation flight, and was at his wing conference in less than 2 weeks since he joined. And he was in uniform, he was wearing his first stripe. You know, so now he didn't need a uniform accommodation, but that first achievement can go very fast, and we don't want to put them up just while paperwork goes through. We want to make it as smooth and effective as possible.
I've got one right now that I have to get back to the individual because they sent it direct to me, and it's just, you know, I'm afraid it's going to hold them up a little bit, but it is what it is. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the more people get used to it, they've done the process before.
Yeah,
they'll know what they have to do to get it, you know, get it through. Now that it's in the regulation, that will help. That you know, people look it up and see what they have to do. You know, and it doesn't get hung up at any level. You know, trying to figure out, well, what do I do with this, or you know, or not knowing, you know. And again, once they've done one or two of them, then it's like, oh yeah, we've done this before. This is all I have to do.
Yeah.
So.
Colonel Sydow, we've had a group moderator gathering questions on Moodle as well. So we'll want to, I don't have access to that, so we'll definitely want to open up to the moderators' questions as well.
Okay.
Good to see you, David.
Thank you, sir.
You're doing a great job. Thanks for being here. I'm
Thank
going to take my turn to have a break.
So I think I'm going to make a couple of notes. Topics we want to make sure we're covering still was skirt and shorts and PT. There was a question about a child actor who had to keep long hair for career, but that wouldn't come under religious, so that wouldn't be a viable option.
Yeah.
But they could use corporate uniform.
Right. Well, but actually cadets are still required to follow grooming standards, so the only time cadets work corporate or required to work corporate is if they're 18 or older and don't meet weight standards. But even if they're in corporate uniform, they have to comply with the Air Force uniform grooming standards. So
something that I have seen done in other places, Air Guard, reserves, etc., is long hair actually tucked up in a short hair wig. They wear a wig to meet the regulations.
yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't remember what the regulation says about wigs.
It doesn't. It just
Okay.
has to look natural.
Okay, I know it used to be that only women could wear wigs outside of medical requirements. So that's beyond the scope of diversity as far as,
Right.
What about maybe also there was a thought that question came in about I think African American hair and regulations and how that can fit in.
well, first of all, when the regulation was published, that expanded the authorized hairstyles.
So well, let's wait till everyone comes back, but that's
Okay.
one thing we want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we've covered most of the questions that are on the chat that I can see.
Well, you're aware that you have someone monitoring chat specifically for questions, and then you also have monitoring in Moodle for questions.
Ah, good. Okay, so we'll just open the moderations after this then.
Bingo.
Thank you, sir.
Makes it a lot easier.
Are there any more pages that we want to cover specifically on the
That one is a specific question. If you go back to the next slide back. Okay, requesting a uniform waiver. That has actually been a discussion happening in Moodle. So we really need to slam this and the paperwork chain to answer that question, if you would be so kind so to do.
Okay.
That's why you've got moderators.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Okay. And we've touched on some of this, but slide 20, the next two slides, 20 and 21, get into it some more. And then
Okay.
there's basically a summary slide. So,
Can I ask a question real quick? Since we're on break, am I allowed to still?
Go for it.
Okay, so my question, and it refers to you, Chaplain Grossman, and well, it refers to both of you guys. I had a little situation that happened with my encampment, and I'm not a chaplain, I'm a CDI. I tell you that right off the bat. I'm a lay leader, I'm a Jewish lay leader, and I'm a CDI, and I did do lay leader services for my Civil Air Patrol encampment.
And
But
who are we speaking with?
Lieutenant Man.
God, thank you.
No problem. We had a situation where one of the girls was actually, well, he was a boy converting to a girl. I don't know what the right word is. I'm so used to being Jewish, I go conversion, but whatever the right terminology is.
Transitioning is the term.
Anyhow, he was demanding that, and he self-identified himself as a girl, and he was demanding, but he hadn't been a girl yet. He was demanding showers with the girls. And we tried to explain to him that this was not going to be acceptable. Then he wanted, so what we ended up doing to accommodate what he needed was, and I don't know if it was 100% right, but we let him go in the senior showers because we couldn't find a time. The problem is trying to find a time for this kid to shower alone. It wasn't going to work because then he was going to miss all the training. So what we did is we let this cadet shower in the senior barracks. We closed one side, we closed the other. We said, go for it. There was a guard on one side and there was me on the other side where the doors were, so we know nobody else could go in. So we kept an eye on it, and she showered in our female shower, and she was by herself. I didn't know what else to do because they came to me and said, well, you're the chaplain assistant. And I said, no, I'm a CSS, we ain't going there. And I said, but the chaplain was gone. Actually, she was in the hospital taking another situation. And I said, this is the only solution I can come up with because we can't let her go with the guys. We can't let her go with the girls because she was actually in the process of changing into a girl.
Watching our time here because we have to be able to get back to the
So I don't know how do you do that? Was I wrong? Was I right?
The first thing is you stepped into the fray. So congratulations. Yay!
And that is not a chaplain's question. That's been taken to the commander and dealt with beforehand. And the way that we've dealt with it before is just like you said, we had showers in our medical unit. And so, and we always looked at it as a modesty issue.
Mm-hmm.
So as a time restraint, I'd like to turn the mic back to Colonel Sydow and give a little introduction here, and then we're going to come back to our main topics.
Okay. Yep. We're back on. It's 8:30 Eastern. So I know we touched on this already, but the process for requesting a waiver, I will always tell people go back to the regulation and read it yourself, because even after 42 years, things change. I don't remember things, and of course, the longer I've been in CAP, the older I am, and the less chance that I may have remembered it correctly. So, it's in 39.1. Take a look at it. The waivers can be requested for Air Force style and for corporate uniforms. It's not limited like it used to be. It's a letter. They have to submit a letter through the chain of command. If it's a gender waiver, then they need to provide medical documentation. If it's a religious waiver, as we talked about already, then the chaplain does the interview and makes a recommendation. It goes up through the chain of command. So the next slide. As it goes up, it summarizes what the reg says about the wing chaplain interview. And the chaplain should do the interview before it goes to the wing commander. And then once it gets to the wing commander adds their endorsement up through the region commander and then up to national. Personnel office, Susie Parker, is the one who manages it for national. And she's also been doing this for years, so she knows the history and what's been approved in the past. It goes to the national commander, and then if it's Air Force style uniform, it goes to Capt USAF. Now, one of the things we've done to help smooth the process is we've gone ahead and sent up an attachment as a standard letter of what the waiver looks like. So all the CAP or the CAP staff commander has to do is add his signature to it if he agrees with it. And he's not having to wait for someone to go type up the letter or find the last one they did and change the names and everything. So that for the one that went through very quickly, that was part of the package to make it a lot easier. And I have provided these examples of these to the diversity officers have a information sharing site where they can access data, which we're still working on getting everybody on, but it is there, and on the old site there are examples of these letters, so to help expedite the process. And then we already talked about some of the more common waiver requests. Overall, and we were getting into out on the break as far as the responsibilities. It's commander's responsibility to support a reasonable request for reasonable accommodations, and again, having that communication to determine what is reasonable and what is appropriate for the members' needs. Some examples of things that a commander can do to help ensure that this is done well, is making sure processes are transparent and consistent. So, for example, and this goes back, into discrimination. So this is beyond this is more of a summary of the whole thing. Is making sure that when there's a selection process going on, that everybody knows what's the criteria for selection. So that everything can be, so members can be evaluated based on the requirements of the position or the the requirements of the activity, and that these other factors don't come into play. And anyway, so we do want to try to resolve issues at the lowest possible level. So, a lot of that falls then, squadron commanders where they can, or activity directors, and and elevating it when necessary, but hopefully resolving it as low as possible level when it comes to accommodations or any questions on diversity and discrimination. I think the next slide is just a summary or some resources for you. We talked about 1-10. For non-discrimination, there's 2 regulations that address that specifically. And then the National Commander's Non-Discrimination Memo, which you can also get from the regulations page under the Non-Discrimination Program regulation. It's linked from there. So, so I know we had some questions about accommodations.
So before we go that one, just a quick review. So the chaplain's responsibility is to be responsible to the commanders, to be a resource to the commanders. But who are the resources? Where are the resources for the chaplains? Who would be resources for the chaplains, ma'am?
Oh, so your diversity officers, the equal opportunity officer at national.
How about legal?
Legal could.
I hear they'd like to hear about the options before it gets to them.
Yes. Really, it's and equal opportunity falls under the general counsel at national. Of course, trying to resolve these again at the lowest possible level helps to avoid that going the legal route. So if we're accommodating, so.
And certainly the chaplain's assistants, the CDIs, whatever the current title is we're going with, they certainly have access to all these resources as well, right?
Yes. So
absolutely.
Another resource, especially when dealing with cadet questions, is National has a volunteer on staff who her background is specific to educational accommodations. And so if you have questions regarding ADHD or other, what might have a educational accommodation for schools, the IAP, and they're asking for the same, for CAP. National Cadet Programs has someone who's basically available to advise, given each situation again.
Excellent. So let's open up to the moderators who've been monitoring the chats and see if there's any questions from them.
Captain Williams, we'll turn it over to the Moodle. How about that, please, sir?
Okay, the first one has to do with accommodation for hair length for male cadets. Wondering if any allotments could be made for longer hair in regard to some religious requirements for male cadets. With adults, the opportunity for corporate uniform is an option, but how do we accommodate a cadet? Question, what religion would not allow you to cut your hair? I'm asking this out of stupidity on my part.
I'll let Chaplain Grossman answer that one.
Okay.
Rastafarian is what comes up in the chat, and Sikh.
Okay, fine. Thank you. That answers the question. So it's a legitimate question.
But it also is answered by the fact that the Sikhs typically will also have that up in a turban.
Correct. Which is why I didn't know that they didn't cut their hair, because I've always seen the turban.
There are times in the Jewish calendar, there's a time during the spring and a time that we're in right now, 3-week period that we're in currently, where the Jews are not allowed to cut hair during a period of mourning. There's a 7-week period during the springtime, and then there's also a short period during the 3-week period during the summertime. But again, with advance notice, I mean, if your hair is cut before that period, you will be within regulations. But I think the question really is more about the Rastafarian, and because they don't wear a turban, so that would be the question is, what might one do for that, ma'am?
Yeah, I think that that covers it. In our wing, we do have a couple, both a cadet and a senior member, who are Sikh, and have the waiver for the turban, and the senior member has a beard waiver and the haircut waiver. So it is that's the one I'm familiar with. But again, this is where, as chaplains, that interview is very important, is to determine what the requirements of the faith are. Also may require a little research if it's not one that you are familiar with, or consulting with a pastor or a minister, or whatever the religious faith calls their leaders, to determine what the requirements are for that particular faith.
Okay, thank you. Next one is, we had one on transgender, but that's been taken care of. How are we to deal with teachings of alternate lifestyle members or subtle proselytizing by them?
I'm not sure what the question is, sorry.
How do we deal with teaching of alternative lifestyles? Gay, lesbian, transgender, and people proselytizing with it. I mean, we deal with the transgender issue. We deal with the gay and lesbian by your members. Thank you very much. But how do we deal with the subtle proselytizing that does happen? It seems to be the question. That seems to be the question.
Jeff, Tim here, and I think the ultimate question really is, there are some members out there who do not believe that it is a correct lifestyle. So any acceptance of it or the appearance of acceptance of it, they believe violates their own religion, which teaches that it's not an acceptable lifestyle. That's just their very appearance and acceptance is sometimes perceived as a proselytizing. That's the question, I believe.
Okay, good. Do religious accommodations only apply to faith recognized by the Air Force? I like that one.
Let me back up one step for just a second. the question that was posed, if I understand the question properly, is that as a religious chaplain, am I condoning behaviors our faith does not accept by accepting someone who's transgender or gay? And so in that respect, if that's the question, then I think what we're looking at is more part of going back to the question of what's the mission. I had this conversation with a chaplain last year at National Conference. And so the first part of the conversation was more about if you're not accepting them, then you already have no influence over them. You just shut down the door. You close, you shut off the opportunity to have a relationship. You can only have an influence on someone if they know you care about them. And they are human beings of inestimable value. So the immediate answer is that our responsibility is to accept them as human beings. And as far as the mission of Civil Air Patrol, sexuality has nothing to do with our mission.
Absolutely.
So we first have to accept who they are as a human being and welcome them into the mission of what Civil Air Patrol is all about. And if you are a transformational leader, you're setting a phenomenal example. You may be surprised at the results that may come.
Chaplain Grossman, Chaplain Rosenberg, if I may interfere for a second.
Please.
I tell people, if you are a car mechanic, I don't call you a car mechanic all the time. So I don't judge people or call people by what their actions are. They're given life by God, and they're a soul from God. So whatever they do in their time, it's on their own, and I don't allow that to interfere with anything. And treat them like we treat everybody else.
Absolutely. And again, it comes back to the core values of Civil Air Patrol, respecting every single person. And I think that's a part that as chaplains we can all agree on. Again, it's a chaplains group, so I'm allowed to talk religiously. I'm going to say that Talmud talks about that when God created the universe, he created forests of trees, herds of animals, fields of flowers, and one human being, because every single individual human being is worth a whole universe. That's where I'm coming from. Colonel Williams.
Okay. Next question. Do religious, I speak for a living too. Do religious accommodations only apply to faiths recognized by the Air Force?
Good question.
Well, the problem is, as we are researching the accommodation as a wing or region chaplain, and if it's a religion that is not recognized, very small, new startup, whatever, how can we research something to see if that is a deeply held belief of an established religion, or if it's just a deeply held opinion? And we don't accommodate opinions per se in many respects, as opposed to religious beliefs. A metaphor for this is a dietetic problem. If I choose to eat vegan, but there's no medical reason for eating vegan, except what I perceive might be appropriate, versus being diabetic, where you best believe I have to watch what I eat. It's a different viewpoint of the accommodation. I don't know. And I think this is a great, great question. How would you handle it?
I would talk to a chaplain.
And as the chaplain that she would talk to, the question, yes, and as the chaplain she would talk to, the response that I would give her would be, that is, obviously our role as wing chaplain, my role as a wing chaplain, to truly understand the needs of that particular individual. Now, the way that I believe Chaplain Williams answered the question is a slight, I will use the term a slight bias in that question itself, because it assumes that only when you say recognized by the Air Force, that would be a religious endorsing body. And that's not the case. We have lots and lots of religions out there that are not endorsed by the Air Force. An example of a very small one is a recent accommodation for the Norse tradition, given, I believe, by the U.S. Army for a beard accommodation. They're actually, that is an extremely small group, and yet it was that individual's deeply held conviction, according to the U.S. Army chaplain that interviewed him. And he could actually, that person could recite rituals and requirements and everything that we define a personal religious belief to be. So I think that that's incumbent on the wing chaplain to truly dig down deep and not look at a label and try to define somebody by somebody's labeling system.
Well, I read the question directly off of the question in Moodle. So the idea that we can accommodate outside of those endorsing bodies, which I would have accepted, which I agree with. The query, do we, as we are looking at a religious accommodation, how much do we rely on the individual versus how much do we rely on external resources, publications of the religious body or what have you, into determining what their requirements are? Because I can tell you, I have Missouri Synod Lutherans in my congregation that don't understand what it means to be Missouri Synod Lutheran.
I think another, Chaplain Murdoch here, I think another way to approach this question is, and I cannot speak for the Air Force, but I believe that all of our military chaplaincies are based on the Constitution and the free exercise of religion, period. Not the free exercise of religion that anybody recognizes. And I think that we would be safe to do as we have been advised by Chaplain Minor and Chaplain Williams, do our homework, and if it is an individual that is truly consistent with the faith traditions, we can make accommodations. We have to make accommodations.
Chaplain Murdoch, thank you for the clarity. That was really clear. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got one more. And it's opening up on invocations again. And remember, we have an entire chat room, and I'd love to see a lot of conversation there so that we can actually sit down and work on this better than just chat. Now the question, their quote, "I always feel that I'm walking on broken glass, and I struggle with invocations that are neutral enough not to offend, but also bring God and spiritualism into our gathering. For a remote chaplain support specialist, it would be helpful to have some ready references that I could turn to lessen my concerns." Okay, that's the end of the question. I would like to say to the chaplains involved, you need to follow what your endorser says. You know,
Yes.
that's your first level of guidance, is in the chaplain guidelines that I had from the endorser. Now they've changed the wording a little bit, but the 2006 guidelines said, "Of course we will pray in our Savior's name." Now it's been modified a little bit. So my endorser expected it. And if I go against my endorser, they can pull my endorsement. So, but this question is from a chaplain support specialist. So now we have the question come up, do we protect their faith as well as inclusivity? And man, I don't want to be the one to say which one is correct.
That's why I get the big bucks.
You got it, boss. But I remember.
Sir, could you
what
put your
you
camera
said
on
in
as well?
2006
Yes.
At North Central, what you said to a region commander about prayers in the name of Jesus at 2006 North Central Region Staff College.
Well, I'm glad you remember. I've slept since then, and my brain
Got
is
it.
like an etch-a-sketch. You know, every day it's a new, clean slate.
Correct. But
but-
this is from CSS.
Yes. Okay. I think we need to understand the CSS, though they are not a chaplain, but they are still a person who has a religious faith, and they are still to be consistent with their faith. And so I think we have to be careful that we don't put chaplain duties on a CSS so that they are put into a position where they are uncomfortable. Now, having said that, I think it's also important for us to understand anybody can pray with anybody, but they have to be able to recognize that they either need to say, as was said earlier in the evening, I'm praying from my faith tradition, and you can pray from yours, or I pray generically, as generic as I possibly can. But then also, we also have in our box of materials, we do have the Air Force or the Army, I think the Navy has one, a book of prayers that have been put out that can be available to anybody in the chaplain corps to use. And if you're struggling with how to do a prayer, that would be a resource for you to use. And CAP, I think, also has put out a book of prayers, and so that would be a place to start to at least be looking over what types of prayers are available that may help you to be more comfortable. I'm hoping that's being helpful. I'm not trying to add and muddy the waters, but I do think that we have to be careful that we do not expect CSSs to, in fact, they're not supposed to do the things that the chaplains do. But they are people of faith. They can be people of faith, and they are allowed to represent their faith, but they have to also fall, when they do that, within the guidelines of how a chaplain represents his faith or her faith.
To note, the Air Force Book of Prayers and the CAP Book of Prayers are both available in the Chaplain Corps Library. I'm still moving the Chaplain Corps Library to the new site, but the old site is available, and I put it in chat, caphclib.org. And then you can search on prayers, I believe. So that is available.
So Chaplain Williams, are you going to refresh my memory?
Let's do it offline, boss, okay? Because sure. I don't want to put you in a position that would compromise what you're doing today, but I will refresh your memory, sir. And I walked away from there saying, I thought you could walk on water.
Well, that's why I am so clean. I keep falling in the water.
Got it.
At the recent NCLS at USAFA, there was General Scheich made a presentation on spiritual service. And at the end of that presentation, there was a cadet, an Air Force cadet, who said, but sir, I'm not religious. And his answer was phenomenal. His answer was absolutely phenomenal. His first response was, you're in Colorado Springs. You walk out and you look around you at the mountains. Is that not a religious experience? So he immediately got the cadet on board with that. And then he said that some of the religions have been around for a few thousand years. You might want to kick some tires and see if anything fits for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was a beautiful, it was a beautiful acknowledgement to the cadet that he does have a spiritual life, even if it's just, the godliness of nature, but also at the same time invited him to look into some other options that, maybe that could fit him. But it was a beautiful, speaking about, the spiritual side of things.
That was the end of the discussion questions in Moodle, but I bet Jessica has a whole bunch for us.
I do, sir. All right. The first question that we have, what types of anti-racism, anti-oppression training programs are available to cadets, officers, and senior members besides the FEMA courses? And can you also touch on the FEMA courses?
Okay. So for the cadet program, a lot of their training is integrated into their course materials. So for example, the required equal opportunity training, non-discrimination training when they first join is integrated in the character development class, the wingman course, in general terms. And there are additional requirements as they go through their leadership textbooks included, and encampment has a required lesson that talks about diversity and non-discrimination. So on the senior side, we're required to do, of course, the equal opportunity non-discrimination training when we first join in level 1. There's a requirement for there's a requirement for commanders to ensure that the non-discrimination policy is briefed annually. And that's, of course, I mentioned at the beginning that we are rolling out an Access version of an actual lesson that I pulled some of the slides from today. And it goes into, more of the requirements and the examples. And the Access course will meet the requirements. And we are working on making it so, commander can also present that at a meeting and to their members, and give them, credit for having completed it, with the commander then being allowed to customize it to, to emphasize certain points or their local situation, their local environment. We've also, with the new senior member education and training program that's replacing the professional development program, in addition to what we've had in level 1, which is also being expanded to include diversity and inclusion, not just non-discrimination. All 5 levels have a lesson, at least one lesson that discusses diversity or inclusion, appropriate for that level. So it's early on, it's your own actions and how you help others, one-to-one or individually. How do you plan activities? How do you incorporate this to the highest level, level 5, which talks about the culture and what as a commander, so in the different, as each level addresses it more and more in depth and builds on what was taught before. And then of course the character development courses, the lessons that the Chaplain Corps develops, it's woven in amongst all that for the cadets and to work with, and those are, seniors are able to participate. And we did recognize that, there is a core values for senior members course that was put out that has a bunch of case studies. And we recognize that those case studies fall short when it comes to discrimination and diversity. So lots of case studies in there, but none that specifically address diversity. And so that is one of the things that Chaplain Murdoch and I have talked about, is getting some case studies and just appending that pamphlet so that those case studies are available for senior members to use in their professional development and in their courses. And we're also looking at as we're working on the strategic plan for next year, one of the things we're looking at is offering more informal training where members can, get classes and more materials through access and the online learning that can enhance their education.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question, and I believe it was touched on, is are there resources for CDIs or CSS for diversity or accommodation requests? Do CDIs or CSS have any roles in that process?
So there's no specific that I'm aware of, and I'm not very familiar, and I know the programs, has been changing. But the resources we've touched on, if they're going to be helping with that, Capt pamphlet 1-10 is a great resource. It covers a lot of different areas. I recommend everybody start with that. The chaplain corps itself, Chaplain Murdoch and others have worked religious accommodations. The regulation, being familiar with 39.1 on what's, what it says for religious accommodations. And then your diversity officers are another resource. Right now, we don't have any formal training for diversity officers, so they're kind of, they're bringing their enthusiasm to the program. That's another thing that's on my to-do list, is to work on a professional development specialty track for them, as well as start doing some informal training to help them to expand their knowledge and experience to be able to help. And their information sharing site is part of that. Is, so with somebody, like we have Illinois Wing diversity officer developed several case studies discussing diversity outside of any formal program, and she sends those out for people to do reflection on and to discuss and post their responses on. Those are available to all the diversity officers in their information sharing site to pull those out if they wanted to find some case studies and use those. We have newsletters that some of the wings are putting out, and when I get a copy of those, I post them, or they're welcome to post them in their information site. So the diversity officers have resources, and that pool is growing as time goes on.
Thank you. My apologies. We also have another question. Can we access local religious authorities for needed religious accommodations? How would we go about doing that?
For that one to Chaplain Murdoch.
The reality, you can go to, am I understanding, is this at a CAP activity, or are you talking about going to someone to just be involved in a conversation to learn about accommodation?
I believe this was in context of a activity such as encampment.
Okay. You can talk to other religious beliefs and learn from them, and you can invite them in to share with their faith group. For instance, you could, if you're talking about a specific group that wants to have their own service, i.e., you can always accommodate by having a vehicle available to take people to their location for that faith traditions service, or you can invite that clergy person to come to your location for those folk to be a participant in that type of a service. If that's what you're talking about, this is, if I'm understanding the question correctly, we can work around that in that way, and we're always open to be able to do that. And part of our responsibility as a chaplain is to make sure that we have religious accommodation for everyone in that encampment, or in that emergency SAR exercise, or in an actual exercise. So what happens is, I can post where all the churches are, and they can choose to go. Or I can say I'm doing a generic Protestant service. I have a rabbi who will do a Jewish service. I have a priest who will do a Catholic service. I have a imam who will do a Muslim service, or I have a vehicle that will take you to those services. And we've accommodated, and we've met the responsibility to accommodate. Now, we also then have to make sure that we're able to do this in a manner whereby it does not interfere with the mission. Remember, on all of these, there's the mission, especially on a search and rescue mission. We don't want to say we're grounding all the planes to do a service at 11 o'clock. You know, we have to be aware of the mission and make sure the mission is accomplished, and we work around the mission, but we still provide for the religious accommodation and the services that are there. Have I helped you at all with that?
I believe that was a great answer to that question. We do have quite a few questions in the chat. One of our chaplains has brought up a situation, and I'm wondering if we can address it. It seems that there's a bit of a confusion over when it is appropriate to pray in one faith or to address one faith at the exclusion of others, depending on the audience and things like that. Can you address, I know we mentioned it a bit ago, but can we go into a little bit more depth on when that is appropriate and how to best handle those situations?
All right, everybody's being quiet, so I guess it's my turn again.
I'll step in when you're ready, sir.
All right. The reality is, help me understand, when is it appropriate to pray in your faith tradition when you're in the midst of others who are not of your faith tradition? Am I understanding it correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You have to be true to your faith and to your endorsement. But as a chaplain, I have the responsibility to minister to everyone. And it is my responsibility to help meet the needs of all of those folk. Therefore, I remember I was, I'll just tell you this, and I was at an encampment one time, and I said, I want to know who my audience is. So what faith traditions are here? So I asked, are there Jewish, those from the Jewish faith? Are there those from the Catholic faith? Are there those from the Islamic faith? Are there those Protestants? And so I tried to cover the major one. Then I said, is there anyone here from a faith tradition that I haven't mentioned? And a young cadet put their hand up, and I said, yes. And the cadet said, I'm Episcopalian. I said, okay, got it. You know, the reality is I was trying to find out who my audience was. Now, I believe that I can pray in the holy name of God and still be true to my faith and not be offensive to others. And I don't think our prayers should be used to push any political, social, or theological agenda. We should be praying to our God about the needs of our people and ministering to the people in front of us. That's why we need to know who they are. So in one respect, if we're going to be respectful, as is true to our true to ourselves, but true to respect is one of our core values, and true to our core values, then we must be respectful as we pray. And we must be respectful to our God, but also to those who are hearing our prayers. And so maybe I'm getting too far down into the weeds for you, but I think that we must know our audience. We must pray according to our faith. But I also believe that there are so many names of God. I do not believe I am being offensive if I use one of the other names of God other than Jesus. That's my personal belief. And I think it comes on the aspect of understanding that verse of scripture that says, if you ask anything in my name, I will do it. Which name of God are you going to use? And I think it's dealing with the authority of the name of God as I studied that passage. So I think that as we pray, we think of our populace that we're talking to. And I think that as we do that out of respect, we are true. Now, if you're from a faith tradition that insists you use the name Jesus in your prayers, then you must say to yourself, if I'm going to be offensive to all these people, how about if I show the commander of this program, if it's a encampment or whatever we're working with, let me show them that I can be a team player, and I will take so-and-so's responsibilities so they can pray, and I will do this so they can do the prayer, and they will be able to pray more accommodating to what you're asking for. That's where I think we have the great privilege to step up and impact people and lay a platform where people who will not necessarily believe the same thing I believe, but they will want to talk to me because I've been respectful and respectful to them and laid a platform where they can feel comfortable to communicate with me. I think that's part of our responsibility as well. But I am not in any way telling you not to be true to your faith. Please don't misunderstand that. But I am telling you, my God is big enough to deal with any of these issues. And he can help me think through how to respond appropriately and how to pray appropriately for the situation. I come from a faith tradition that does not write out their prayers. But I tell you, when I go into some of these situations, I spend a lot of time praying about how I'm going to pray. And then I do write out some things so I don't do anything that would be offensive to my personal faith or be offensive to anyone that's listening to my prayer. But I also have to remember, I'm praying to God. I don't want to be offensive to him either.
Bravo, sir. Bravo.
May I make a comment?
Yes, you may.
If I am asked to give an invocation, it is because someone believes that such an invocation is going to be advantageous to the occasion. Agreed? We're asking blessings on the encampment for safety. We are asking God bless our native land, whatever. It behooves me to pray in a way that I know is most acceptable to the one to whom I pray, which informs the form of the prayer. Now, in the chat a while ago, somebody asked, would I be offended if an imam prayed to Allah? Well, no, I would expect it. He is respecting me enough to pray in the best way he knows how. I'm not aware of any female imam, so I will use the word he there.
Air Force
But
just
this imam is
brought one
praying
in.
in the way that is most appropriate, that the imam believes they are doing the best for everybody concerned. I may not agree with them. That I think, yeah, but that's okay. I would expect it. At John Hickenlooper's second inauguration as governor, there was a Native American medicine man who spoke an invocation in Navajo, and a rabbi, female, who spoke the invocation in Hebrew, neither of which I understood. There was no way I could say amen to either because I didn't know what they said, but I applauded that they said it. And that's something that we also need to remember. I have a quality control to do the best job I can on your behalf. Or in the Christian tradition, I'm facing the altar at this time, bringing your petitions to God in the best way I can. Comment intended. You can yell at me now and I'll resign if I need to.
Chaplain Murdoch,
Sure.
if I could respond to that.
You may.
It's important to realize why we're being asked to pray. Most of the time it's because of our position, not of who our endorser is.
Correct.
So efficacy of our prayer is not necessarily what the commander is making a decision on. I believe Colonel Sydow and I are probably the only two on the call who have active military command experience. I could be wrong here, and if so, I'm sorry for that. But I think that a quick, again, it is your position as wing chaplain or the head chaplain at the encampment, or you're the squadron chaplain, and so you're expected to perform that function is where usually that invitation to pray comes from. So that's usually the source, I believe. So again, possibly something to say, and you can yell at me now if you want. I think
I still love you, Tim.
that's fine. That said,
I wanted to add one more piece, and I think that's what Brigadier General Phelka had mentioned, is that as a commander, and we do speak at the behest of the commander, as a commander, he wants us to speak. He calls upon us to speak, to unite the room and to uplift the spirit within the room, so that as the next, whether it's a ceremonial change or whatever it is, as a commander goes to speak, we've, in a sense, we've set the stage. We've united the room and uplifted the spirit of the room for the commander to speak and to bring out whatever that event is for, whether it's graduation ceremony or change of command. We are the ones who set the stage and bring the Spirit of God into that event. And that's the request that we're made to do. And interestingly enough, I've seen some people do it. And now I have a son who God bless him, he claims to be an atheist at this time, but tomorrow could be different. But he has been most impressed when a chaplain has been able to get up and speak in a pluralistic way that actually raises his spirit as well. So he's, claiming that he's not having a faith base, but at the same time, he's still getting lifted by a chaplain who comes in to speak about the unity and the unity of our goals and things like that. So I believe, as General Sheikh said at NCLS, that you can definitely have a spiritual awakening without having to attach God's name to it. Your mere presence in the room does that already. So if you get up to speak and you've been called to do an invocation and you're speaking as a chaplain, I think the God part is already is granted, is given, and then whatever you say from that point on does so.
Well, I think those are great comments. As the director here, I'd like to, as we start winding down, bring up one last point in a situation. Colonel Sydow mentioned that we come from probably one of the most diverse wings in Civil Air Patrol, and I just want to share this one experience. When I was a brand new chaplain in probably one of the most diverse squadrons in Civil Air Patrol, it was impressed upon me that our parents decide the religion of our cadets, that we are here to foster them in the religion that their parents have selected for them. And that's something that I've always tried to to take with me. And given that, in a recent encampment experience, again, having the most diverse wing, I have the most liberal and the most conservative of religious cadets coming in with background. I had the experience of having to deal with Christian cadets putting targets on our Muslims and Sikh cadets for evangelism, that they as cadets felt their role was to evangelize their peers during the encampment experience. And each of us will probably have to answer that question, and I would love to see what the discussion will be in Moodle. The way I had to handle it was to remind our cadets that the cadet program is a leadership experience, and they were learning to become leaders in a pluralistic environment. And the best thing that they could do was to learn to be a cadet leader of a Muslim or Sikh cadet, using their own, using the faith of the Sikh cadet's faith, and challenge the Muslim cadet in their own faith to be the best cadet that they could be. And if they could learn to challenge their peers in their peers' own religion to rise to become the most mission effective, best cadets they could possibly do, that was what their job was for that encampment experience, that we weren't going to use the pressure of encampment and peer pressure in a stressful situation already. So those are just something that I wanted to bring up to make sure that was recorded on this so that we could think about it in the future here. I do have, before we turn and start to really truly wind down, I have one poll question that I think is probably kind of interesting, and I would love everybody to answer it. Go for it. How many different religious symbols are available at our national cemeteries for veterans?
While you are getting the poll, sir, both the CAP Book of Prayer and the Air Force Book of Prayer from 2014 are in the resource section on Moodle. We found them and I've put them in that one place.
Very good. So far we have 100 of 124. In just a few minutes, I'll wind this one down.
People are saying they can't find the poll. If you are on Zoom using a web browser and not one of the downloaded applications, the polls don't show up. So the poll was the question, how many different religious symbols are available for VA headstones or military cemetery headstones?
All right. Well, let me go ahead and end the polling and share the results for those who could see. The four choices that I gave were 8 world religions, 15, 43, or 60 or more. The most answer was the 8 world religions, and that is quite wrong. It's the last choice. There are over 60 different religious symbols that are available for a veteran to choose from. I will put the picture from the Veterans Administration of all the religious symbols that are available up there, or good. We're also getting the website available. Something to think about as we look towards how we're going to do funerals for the Veterans Administration. Realize that we have a great plethora of religions out there as well that we may end up serving. So just a thought. Well, we have 4 minutes left, and I trust that this has been an enriching experience, and I can't tell you how pleased I am as course director that this conversation, that we've had this to this length of depth. Chaplain Murdoch, I think praise is in order, and I'll let you do the thanking to our speakers this evening, sir.
I do want to say thank you to Colonel Sydow and to Chaplain Grossman. Dovid and Liz, you've done a wonderful job for us tonight. I do appreciate it so very, very much. Thank you for letting some of us also chime in and try to lend some of our what we hope is wisdom to the conversation. It's been a good evening, everyone. Chaplain Minor, are you wanting me to close out tonight?
Sir, yes, sir. If you would love to close us out in prayer so that we go away refreshed, I would feel very, very good about that, sir.
All right, I'll be happy to do so. So as we close tonight, I know that you're all comfortable in your homes, but I ask you as a safety brief to be careful when you leave your computers. Don't trip over wires. Get to your next place in your home safely, please. But also, as we walk through the end of the day and the end of this session, let's thank the Almighty for his hand upon us. Almighty God, we come to you tonight, grateful that we can learn, grateful that we can discuss, grateful that we have the opportunity to impact lives with truth. And I pray that you will help us as we learn, as we apply our core values, and we, though we may disagree, still respect one another and disagree agreeably and move forward for your glory. We would ask tonight that you would put your hand upon our leaders in our nation, from the local to the state to the federal level. Give them wisdom in these very trying days, and give us, any of us who have the opportunity to speak wisdom to any of them, may we speak well. And so tonight we ask that we will take the things we have learned, we will apply them to our lives, and we will bring glory to God and country, and thank you for the privilege of serving God and country. In your most holy name I pray. Amen.
Well, thank you all. Good night. And next meeting on Tuesday is Space Night, and it's all about space and ministry in space, and it's all great. So
good night. Good night, everyone.
good night.